Welcome back, America. We're going to stay on the subject of the latest fight going on within our nation's capital with our next guest, and he doesn't want another dime to go to Ukraine, and he has been asking for House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and his Republican colleagues to be more fiscally responsible for quite some time now. Imagine that. Joining us now is an important voice on the House Judiciary Committee, Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz. Congressman, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me, Amanda.
You know, I've heard Congressman Hakeem Jeffries frame this as the, what did he call it, the extreme MAGA shutdown. And he's doing a very good job of repeating that line and towing it very well. And he keeps talking about these poison pills that folks like you and other Republicans have inserted in it. But I imagine what he means by poison pills are just items that people who voted for you and your Republican colleagues wanted to be accomplished. But what are some of those holdout items? And in, 3 days, are we going to have a shutdown?
We very well may have a shutdown in 3 days, and that's not something that anyone is looking forward to. I'm not a shutdown cheerleader by any means. But to me, what's extreme is a $33 trillion debt with $2 trillion annual deficits on top in an era of rising interest rates, where this debt is going to have to be refinanced because it's coming off of low interest financing and it's going to be refinanced at a higher rate. That is going to create major cash flow problems for our country. We're going to be paying more in interest on our national debt than the $886 billion that we're currently spending on our military, the principal job of the federal government. So here's my plan. Rather than negotiating just in terms of continuing resolutions or omnibus bills, where the entire government is basically lumped into one up or down vote for funding, we should be taking on each of these agencies with single subject spending bills. And, the normal muscle memory of Washington is to always revert to these continuing resolutions, just keep funding everything the same way it was last year, last month, last decade. And that has contributed to our debt, and it has led to the taxpayer continuing to fund programs that never even have to demonstrate their efficacy anymore. They just run like a government on autopilot. So when we were able to, I think, get Speaker McCarthy out of that normal corrupt muscle memory of Washington, D.C. and onto spending bills, we've seen some progress. Now, today, we've taken up some of the defense spending legislation, and we're plowing through amendments on that. Right now, on the floor, as I'm speaking to you, there's debate on the Department of Homeland Security. And if we can pass funding bills for the Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, our state and foreign ops, for our embassies to continue operating, and our Department of Agriculture for food safety inspection, then I think we'd have about 73% of the discretionary budget funded. And if it takes a little longer to resolve those other agencies, that's not ideal, but it certainly is preferable to the path we're on to financial ruin.
Congressman, I want to ask a little bit, when you guys ran last year, and I know you were excited about this, it was, we're going to get back to the way budgets are supposed to be done. We're going to do the 12 appropriation bills, and you promised normal order. And it seems almost shocking now. Your leaders seem shocked that you're actually asking to be held to that standard. But that was the promise you made voters. Why is the leadership not see the gap between what was promised voters and where they are at this moment, 72 hours before a shutdown?
I'll be blunt. In the House of Representatives, we are poorly led by Speaker McCarthy. If this was a serious effort to get our appropriation legislation done, we would have begun back in the spring. We would have stayed during August instead of people being scattered around the country and around the globe. We would have worked through these issues like Ukraine funding, like some of the border policies that have to append to funding the Department of Homeland Security, some of the sticky issues we have with our agriculture policies and work requirements for food stamps. But the leadership wants to truncate that. What they want to do is delay as long as possible, then back the lawmakers up against shutdown politics, which are never pleasant, and then they hope that you'll just agree to a series of continuing resolutions until you ultimately get to an omnibus bill that is the up or down funding of the entire government. And I don't say that as some sort of pundit or prognosticator, but as a historian, because that is exactly what has happened every single year I've been here. And it's the way our country has really been governed since the mid-90s. So to liberate ourselves from that, we have to break the fever. We have to maybe be willing to endure a shutdown over the weekend or for a few days. We don't want anyone's paycheck or pay period to be interrupted, but we have got to get these individual spending bills considered under a new paradigm, because the old paradigm only leads to more debt and deficits and really the de-dollarization of the global economy. I don't think it's by accident that you see Saudi Arabia and Iran selling more energy in Chinese currency. I don't think it's an accident that you see the African Union trying to use more local currency and de-dollarize as they sell more rare earth minerals on the global market. And the BRICS system presents a real, I think, infrastructure where a lot of these emerging economies will be moving away from the dollar. It's not the time to be running $2 trillion annual deficits.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Congressman, help me understand the disconnect between the rhetoric and the action, because very, very often we hear Republicans talk about how they want to be fiscally responsible, and sometimes Democrats too, but mainly Republicans, and how, the government is bloated beyond what it should be, beyond what our founding fathers wanted it to be. But it seems to me that the way that we achieved this bloated government is with the omnibus bills, the bills that have, 1,000 provisions in them, not the single subject bills.
No, you're exactly right. That is the operative question. And, you began this interview with the criticism from Hakeem Jeffries that I'm an extremist because I want single subject review of legislation. Well, I guess most of the states in America must also be run by extreme MAGA Republicans, because in almost every state, they set a top line number based on expected revenue, and then they individually go and fund the agencies of state government. I know that as a former state lawmaker from Florida. But only in Washington, D.C., you have the very disconnect that you just described manifest not as a bug of the system, not because something went wrong uniquely in Washington, D.C. It is a feature of the system, because we have far too many lawmakers who are completely owned by lobbyists and special interests. And those lobbyists, they don't want their individual programs that they advocate for subject to amendment and review. They just want to be able to buy off the right lawmaker with a sizable enough donation, with someone powerful enough that can get it baked in to a whole big deal. And then, shucks, who wants to vote no on a big up or down vote for the whole government? Who wants to vote against our veterans and our troops and against Social Security? So they're able to avoid a government that is based on meritocracy and instead lean into some of the, I think, most perverse elements of this area that really deride our fellow countrymen.
Congressman, I want to ask about leadership, because you were very blunt about the failure of leadership. This was a path that everybody knew they were supposed to do. Republicans promised to do it, and yet it didn't get carried out over the last 8 months, and now you're up at that classic last-minute thing. What is the solution to the poor leadership? Do you intend to bring a motion to vacate the chair? What is the cure to the leadership issue that you see in this budget failure?
I'm struggling with that now, John. I'm praying about it. I'm taking counsel from a lot of my fellow members. Like right now, my singular focus is on getting these bills reviewed and passed, making sure that we make the right cuts at the Department of Justice and the FBI, that we have the right gating for the ATF. So that's really, I'm plowing my work now. Right. But we do have to deal with that question. And one thing I know, if Kevin McCarthy uses Democrat votes in the House of Representatives to advance Joe Biden's spending priorities, he cannot remain as the Republican speaker. Maybe he could remain as the Democrat speaker, or as a speaker that oversees some sort of coalition of Republicans and Democrats. But if you want to be the Republican speaker, you definitely cannot use Democrats to preserve your power and to advance Joe Biden's spending priorities. A motion to vacate is a last resort. It still is in Kevin McCarthy's hands whether or not we really face that, because if we didn't do a CR, if we plowed through these appropriations bills, if we forced the Senate to negotiate on the terms of single subject bills, which liberals, conservatives, moderates all seem to agree is the right process, if we did that, I do believe Kevin McCarthy could save his speakership. But if it's just more of the obfuscation and reversion to the traditional Washington norms and the selective amnesia about commitments that have been made to our colleagues and to the American people, then I think his time will have come to an end.
Pretty clear.
Yeah, that muscle memory is so strong. Sometimes you have to re-break a bone to actually fix it. So I know that these growing pains might be a little painful for the country, but you are working so hard, and we appreciate you being here with us tonight.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Congressman.